About 5 years ago, I moved into an apartment that was closer to downtown. I had the urge during that time to live closer to the city. So, I ended up looking and finally finding a reasonable place after almost 2 years. It was an apartment up for rent, about 5 minutes with traffic from the downtown area I always wanted to live in. I went after it quickly. It was so cheap, but it looked very nice for the price, and the pictures online sold it to me. I researched the apartment complex and nothing seemed wrong with it. I called to set up an appointment with the property manager so she could show it to me. When I finally physically saw the apartment, I just fell in love with it all over again. It was so beautiful, fully furnished, plus the square footage was perfect. When we got to the leasing information, she only mentioned month-to-month leasing. I asked for information about a 1-year lease. This made her a bit flustered. I wasn't sure why at the time, and she had a worried look on her face. She looked at me concerned for a minute and finally said to me, "Normally in the area, people just what month to month, but I can find a 1-year lease paperwork for you." This put me off a bit, but not enough to let this amazing opportunity pass me by. She looked for it for a bit, and she seemed to have gone through certain files a few times over, as if she didn't want to find the paperwork. But eventually she reached over after finding it, and with her hands shaking, she handed it to me. I didn't pay much attention to the situation. I was a bit too excited about living near the city. I filled out the leasing contract, and once again before she finalized the paperwork, she began to ask me if I was sure, but suddenly stopped mid-sentence, looking up behind me. My eyes followed her gaze to see a well-dressed man standing in her office doorway, staring at her. He asked if everything was okay, and how I was going to love the building and its amenities. I smiled at him and let him know that I did some research on this building on my own. He didn't look too happy with what I said, and in a weird tone he said, "Well, I hope it wasn't anything that was going to run you away." I told him no, and I was sold on the area and the apartment. He only replied with "good" and walked away. I went ahead and provided 2 months rent and gave the deposit for a future puppy that I was going to get after I was completely settled in. After this weird encounter, I started to look into some of the other apartments in the building that was also up for rent. They were almost triple the price that I was going to be paying for my apartment. I was shocked and thought maybe somebody must have died in the apartment, but nothing came up during my second search. I stopped looking and decided to be thankful since this apartment really didn't have all the other upgrades the other apartments did. Plus the view wasn't that great. I moved in a few weeks later and celebrated with my sister. I worked from home and had an unpredictable schedule, but it wasn't affecting me as much, since to me nothing is better than being at home and just relaxing. Having an excuse to cancel unwanted invitations to lunch or brunch because I was working from home. I was excited and happy. Getting calls from work and the occasional conference calls was the only drawback, but I just mainly kept my camera off and talked when spoken to. Something unusual started happening 3 weeks after I moved in, but I didn't want to make a weird thing out of it because it wasn't that bad at first. It started during a conference call while I was taking notes and just listening to the assistant advisor talking about the next assignment that I really didn't have anything to do with, but for some reason she wanted my team to help with it anyways. I started hearing someone breathing into their mic a little too closely. It didn't cause any problems because I could hear just fine, but it started to increase and I started to get more annoyed as it continued to do so. I looked around in the conference call to see what was going on and who could have been doing it. Either nobody cared about it or they didn't hear it as bad as I did. No one was reacting to it. So I turned on my mic to ask whoever it was to stop breathing into their microphone since it was getting too hard to hear. But everyone else just stated that they didn't hear what I was hearing and that it wasn't them. I told them I must have made a mistake. The conference call went on and a few minutes later the breathing started up again. But this time it was so close and intense that it felt like someone was breathing into my ear, like they were physically next to me. I quickly yanked my headphones out of my ears and looked around my living room and behind the couch I was sitting on. Nothing was there. I proceeded to take my headphones out of the laptop to finish the conference call. I didn't hear the breathing anymore. As the day went on, I forgot about it, and I did my daily routine before sitting down to watch a movie. I started getting tired and started to fall asleep, but then all of a sudden the light bulb in the lamp next to me exploded, startling me awake. I got up and examined the area and the lamp to try and figure out what may have caused this, but nothing seemed to be the root of the problem. I just got up and went through my kitchen looking for extra light bulbs. I found a box and checked it to make sure everything was still valuable, and they were. I then walked back into the living room and unplugged the lamp. I then started to clean up the broken light bulb glass off the end table and carefully removed the screw base of the light bulb. It was stuck for a bit, but I removed it after a few tries. I then replaced it, but right when I plugged in the lamp, the new light bulb exploded. this time catch me right in the face, since I was leaning over it to plug it in. I rushed to the bathroom to clean it up. I checked in the mirror to see if any glass got into my eye. I was relieved that there were just small pieces on my eyelash and a few on my cheek. I had to gently brush them off, and then I proceeded to wash my face. While I was leaning over to wipe my face with a towel, I heard the same damn breathing again. I froze with my head in my towel, scared to move or look around. The breathing got louder and closer. Tears started running down my face. If someone was in there with me, they would have heard me whimpering. The breathing stopped suddenly, but right as I looked up, because I thought it was gone, something or someone whispered in my left ear in a very low tone, "I won't lose my chance this time." And then they started laughing. The laugh was almost demonic. This made me run out of the bathroom looking for my keys in the bedroom. There was no way that I was going to stay here and deal with whatever the hell this shit was. But as I started going through my nightstand for the keys, something cut my index finger. I pulled my hand out of the drawer. I turned on the small lamp on the nightstand to see a bit better and saw some glass in the drawer. I grabbed the sock to tie up my cut and kept looking for my keys. I couldn't find them. I always put them there. I looked around some more and eventually saw them on the floor. I didn't hesitate to grab them and started to quickly walk towards the front door. But before I could make it, I saw something standing in front of the door. Whatever it was, it didn't move. It didn't seem like it was looking towards me. I couldn't see it that well. I got terrified, but then I just started to say, "Fuck it," running towards the door and yelling, "Move the fuck out of my way." The figure turned slightly around and darted into the kitchen. I didn't care for who or what it was, because if it wanted the apartment, it could have it. It left behind a substance on the floor that I could see trailing behind it. As I was closer to the door, something rushed towards me, faster than I could react, causing me to collide with the door and hitting the floor with a lot of force. As I tried getting up, I kept losing my footing on something slimy on the floor. It was all over me. When the smell hit me, it was so disgusting. I started gagging, but I eventually got up. I looked around and it seemed to vanish. I didn't stay to look for it and just ran out the door. I ran to the parking garage and got in my car. I was out of breath, terrified, and covered in whatever substance that was on the floor. The garage lights made it clearer for me to see. It was a grayish, gooey substance. The smell was filling up the car. I almost felt like I couldn't breathe. I didn't go back into the apartment. I somehow fell asleep in the car. Someone closing their car door and driving off woke me up the next morning. I thought that I must have had a very vivid nightmare, but the substance on my clothes reminded me that I wasn't. I decided to go back upstairs because there had to be an explanation. When I got to the door, I hesitated, but turned the doorknob, opening it easily since I left it open the night before. As I stepped inside, I looked down on the floor to see if the substance was still there. The floor appeared to have been cleaned. I went to check my nightstand to try and clean up the glass in the drawer, but when I went to check, nothing was there. It was clean. When I checked my hand to verify, the cut was still there. Then what could have cut my hand? I decided to call my sister to come over, since I didn't feel safe being alone at the moment. She told me she would have to come after work, so she could spend the week with me and enjoy the apartment with me. This made me feel happy, to know that I wasn't going to be alone and to figure out if I lost my mind or not. When Adriana got to my apartment, it was around 9 o'clock. Nothing happened during the first couple of hours she was there. I tried to explain to her what happened to me, and she thought I was being funny and thought that I must have had a nightmare. I showed her my cut and she told me anything could have caused that. She told me I've always been very clumsy, but when I went to show her my shirt, it was completely clean. I looked it over in surprise, and I told her it was there. I was covered in it. I tried to tell her that everything that I told her was real, but without a shirt to show her, I sounded crazy. I let her go and I just told her if she ever felt like someone was breathing in her ears to tell me. She laughed it off and went into the kitchen to make some tea for both of us to relax and fall asleep. Whatever tea she made, it helped me sleep and unwind. But later that night, I was woken up by something breathing in my ear again. I also felt pressure on my back this time, as I was sleeping on my stomach. I couldn't get up or turn over. The breathing sounded more like wheezing, and it was strenuous. I was able to move my head though, and I looked over to see if my sister was in bed, and she wasn't. I moved my arms and tried to reach behind me with my left hand, to only feel something large, cold, and sludgy. I pulled my hand back, and it was covered in the same slimy substance. It started dripping down onto my pillow, and I could feel it dripping all over my back. I tried to get up again and still couldn't. I turned my head around, and this time I was greeted by complete darkness. But this time the dark mass was moving. It was moving up. It looked like it was leaning from on top of me. I was able to see sort of a face, like a dark void for eyes, but it didn't have a mouth. Its breathing got very loud. I couldn't understand how it was breathing. I tried to scream, but I was so afraid nothing came out. I thought maybe this was sleep paralysis. But why would I be able to move my limbs in my head? While I continued to struggle, I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my back. I finally let out a cry when the pain wouldn't stop, and it continued to grow. Whatever it was kept going deeper into my back. I tried to struggle, but I was just held down with so much force that I couldn't breathe. Then out of the blue, I heard a scream. It was Adriana. She was standing in the doorway, staring at my direction. She ran towards me screaming, and with a lot of force, she shoved whatever was on my back off of me. At the same time, whatever was ripping into my back was ripped out. Blood splattered onto the bed and Adriana's clothes. The creature let out a horrifying scream as it landed on the floor with a loud thud. Adriana then placed her hand on my back and pulled me up. We heard the creature crawling across the wooden floor and making its way towards the bathroom. It continued to make weird sounds. The creature started to throw things and break things in the bathroom. Adriana tried to keep me on my feet as I started to slip out of her grasp. She started rushing out the room with me as fast as she could. We heard the creature slowly moving towards us again. The pain in my back was so bad, it was making it hard to move. But suddenly, a feeling of numbness started to travel down my back and through the rest of my body. I couldn't move much now, but somehow I managed to move enough to get us outside of the bedroom. Right as we reached the front door and Adriana was leaning down to open it, the creature slammed into the couch violently, pushing it towards the hallway, but it got blocked in between the hallway. I think it was trying to crush us between the doorway so we couldn't leave, but it missed. Adriana took the opportunity and rushed out the door with me as fast as she could. Just as we made it enough to close the door, the creature collided so hard into it, it caused us both to fall towards the apartment door across from mine. When we looked up, the door had a crack in it. The creature kept ramming into the door and making a lot of noises. I didn't understand how no one else heard this. Adriana started to bang on the door and asking for help. We heard a person in the apartment walking over to the door, and then it was silent. Adriana then started yelling and pleading for them to open the door until a man's voice yelled from the other side,
"To fuck off and die already."
We both looked at each other in shock. Adriana started crying, and I told her to pick me up. We need to move, because it doesn't seem like he's going to help us. We didn't understand why. As she started walking with me towards another apartment door, she started banging and asking for help. The man in this apartment also yelled,
"Stop trying to fight it and just let it happen."
We were both terrified and started to understand what was happening. As I was in the process of telling Adriana maybe we should just run and leave the complex, the creature destroyed some more of the door, sending parts of it flying into the hallway. As we started moving towards the stairs, we heard a door opening and saw a woman peeking out of her apartment. Adriana yelled out to her and she said that we were being attacked. The woman tried to hurry to shut her door, but we were too close and Adriana pushed her way in with me. The woman wasn't happy and looked at us in fear and anger. She told us we couldn't be in her place and that we need to get out before she becomes a target too. Adriana looked at the woman pretty pissed and told her to shut up and hand her her phone. The woman said no. Adriana proceeded to lean me against the front door and locked it. The woman turned around and pulled out her phone and started dialing a number. As Adriana was about to ask her, what did she mean by that she didn't want to be a victim too? We heard the woman on the phone saying,
"They're in here."
Adriana lunged at the woman and struggled with her a bit until she took the phone away from her. She proceeded to dial 911, and when she got on the phone with the operators, she wouldn't take her eyes off the woman on the ground. The woman was crying and muttering,
"Why couldn't you just let it happen? I'm going to get kicked out now. Where am I going to live now? You guys ruined everything."
Adriana continued to talk to the police. As Adriana was on the phone with the police, someone was knocking on the door. The man yelled,
"Hurry and open up, Jennifer. This is going to fuck everything up. It's going to turn on us next. We need to feed it now.
I started to feel a bit better and regained some movement in my legs. I yelled out that we were on the phone with the police. The knocking stopped and I heard several footsteps moving away from the door. The woman on the floor didn't say anything anymore. Her personality completely changed. She got up and sat on the chair at her kitchen table and just watched us. We both kept an eye on her as well. We waited in the apartment for almost what seemed like hours. And then someone started knocking on the door. By then I gained some more feelings in my legs. I slowly got up with a bit of a wobble in my walk. I checked the peephole and saw 2 police officers at the door. I felt relieved. As I leaned over to open up the door, the woman got up and started screaming, running towards Adriana, kicking and punching her. The police officers heard the commotion and ran past me and tackled the woman to the ground. They had trouble controlling her at first, but they managed to handcuff her. 2 other men ran into the apartment, one of them tackling me and started dragging me out of the apartment. The other man tried to go after the other police officer. I was fighting the man off as much as I could, but he was stronger than me and I didn't have enough strength. So I bit down into his arm, taking a small chunk of it off, but it wasn't completely off. He yelled in pain and threw me down pretty hard. Adriana came running out of the apartment towards us. As the man looked up at me, he said, "Screw this." I noticed that it was the same guy that I saw outside of the property manager's office. He ran off holding onto his arm, but he didn't make it that far. Because once he ran in front of my apartment door, the man's screams were mixed in with the monster sounds, and then it went completely silent. Me and Adriana headed back towards the opposite direction. The police officers were coming out with the other man and woman handcuffed. As we started telling them what happened, the light bulbs behind them started exploding. I told them to run. They started to tell us to stop, but not until a terrifying sound made them follow us with the 2 attackers in handcuffs. We made it outside the apartment complex. A lot of people were gathered outside, and more police officers were also arriving at the scene. The crowd got larger as well. We were taken to the hospital to get checked out. While I was being examined by a nurse, I was also being questioned by some officers. The officers were asked to leave though, as the nurses had to undress me in order for me to be properly examined by a doctor. I was rushed shortly after because I had deep punctures in my back that needed surgery. After my surgery, when I came to, Adriana told me that the doctors informed her that I had some kind of numbing slime substance in my wounds. It seemed to have affected my nerves in my whole body. They weren't sure what it was at first, but when they sent it to the lab, it was verified. It wasn't anything that they've ever seen before. I guess that explained why my body wasn't moving properly. After a while, a detective came into my room and notified us that the building was almost completely vacant after they finished searching it. They only found 4 other people in the apartment complex, but they all refused to talk. He also mentioned that if I needed to get anything in the building, I could let them know so that I could get an escort back to pick up my belongings. I had to stay at the hospital for a week, and Adriana stayed with me. She was also injured, but not as bad, thankfully. Hey guys, I'd like to thank you for listening to my story. If you liked it, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and give the video a thumbs up. We will be posting more. Thanks!